Hello and welcome to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series, sponsored by the Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation. I'm your host, Ron Duffy. In these interviews, you'll meet successful business leaders and entrepreneurs who talk about what it takes to become a great leader and share their experiences building effective organizations with a Scanlon plan. A Scanlon plan is an innovative leadership process for total organization development. It consists of a set of assumptions about human motivation and behavior, general principles for management based on these assumptions, and specific procedures for implementing these principles. The Scanlon Leadership Network is a nonprofit association of high-performance, values-led organizations founded by Joe Scanlon and Dr. Carl Frost. Joe Scanlon was a steelworker and MIT lecturer who in the 1950s pioneered some of the first high-performance work systems based on the revolutionary idea that the average employee wants to work and has great creativity if given the opportunity. Dr. Frost carried on Scanlon's work at Michigan State University, conducting research and installing Scanlon plans. Member organizations have won the Baldrige Award, the Shingo Prize, hundreds of supplier awards, and 5 have been ranked in the top 50 best places to work in North America. The Scanlon Leadership Network is considered one of the best-kept secrets in American business. The Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation brings this series of interviews to you as a public service to help leaders create better organizations for workers, consumers, and investors. Scanlon, where the best ideas come together. Our guest today is Dwane Baumgardner, retired chairman and CEO of Donnelly Corporation. Dwane served as chairman and CEO of Donnelly Corporation for 22 years. The Donnelly Corporation serves the global automotive industry as a supplier of mirrors, windows, door handles, and electronics to all the major automotive original equipment manufacturers in North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. Donnelly Corporation began competing in the global market as a market leader in the 1960s. During Dwane's leadership tenure at Donnelly, the company doubled in size on average every 5 years for more than 20 years. Donnelly grew from $30 million in revenue in 1980 to approximately $950 million in revenue in 2002. Donnelly Corporation was ranked in 2 editions of the book The 100 Best Companies to Work For in America, and was in the top 10 in the 1994 edition. Donnelly Corporation was acquired by Magna International in 2002. It is now known as Magna-Donnelly. Prior to retirement, Dwane served as vice chairman and president of Magna-Donnelly for 1.5 years. In this interview, I asked Dwane to share his views on 2 main topics. 1, the use of Scanlon plans as a process to help create high-performing and ethical organizations. And 2, the key ideas in The Leadership Roadmap, a book co-authored by Dwane which discusses how to develop the right people systems and the right business systems to achieve organizational success and sustain it for the long term. To start the interview, I asked Dwane to share why the Scanlon business principles are important to him. Dwane, you were the recipient of the first Scanlon Stewardship Award. You have a long record of being committed to the Scanlon principles. Tell our listeners why the Scanlon business principles are important to you.
Well, Ron, I believe so strongly in the Scanlon business principles because I believe that they were the single most important factor in the success of Donnelly Corporation and my success as a leader of Donnelly Corporation. In my view, without the Scanlon principles, the teams and the people at Donnelly Corporation could never achieve the strong growth record I just described. and all the other recognition that they received over the years. Being recognized by our customers, for example, as achieving the top quality awards and being awarded lots of new business, which funded the growth rate, which allowed us to double on average every 5 years. So I believe that without the Scanlon principles, I personally couldn't have provided the quality of leadership to support our teams and people within the organization. I feel very strongly that the Scanlon principles provide a framework for leadership and organization development that is the clearest and most coherent and most concise and comprehensive than I've ever been able to find. And I've read a lot of books and talked to a lot of consultants and talked to a lot of academics, on leadership and organization development. The other point I'd like to make about the Scanlon principles is that some people feel that these principles are nice, but they're good to use participation, for example, which is one of the principles, and you can only do that in good times. And I say the Scanlon principles are extremely important in both good times and bad times. And I believe that they can help any individual, they can help any team, or they can help any organization in total develop professionally and organizationally and help people develop personally to achieve a sustained high level of performance. And the last comment I'd like to make about why Scanlon was so important to me is over the years that I was with Donnelly is because of the Scanlon Leadership Network. The network provided a tremendous opportunity to interact with other organizations that were committed to Scanlon and to share our experiences and best practices, and I found that to be most invaluable.
As you and I prepared for this interview, I asked for some more detailed information regarding how the Scanlon business principles could help a company in tough times, and you shared some information I'd like you to share with our listeners about how Donnelly did during some recessions. The first one we talked about was the automotive recession of 1980. I think you said the recession lasted 3 years. It was the worst downturn in the automotive industry since the 1929 Great Depression. My notes say that you had about 400 employees and you had to make reductions in the workforce. Tell us how the Scanlon principles helped you through that process.
You set the question up excellent, because it was really a terrible period, because everything kept getting a little worse every quarter, and we'd keep saying it can't get any worse as we were making our projections moving forward, and it would keep getting a little worse. So it was a very difficult time to go through. The reason that the Scanlon principles helped us, or the way they helped us so much during that period, is that we finally got to a point while we were making adjustments as we had each new forecast for an upcoming quarter and year. We finally got to the point that we realized the reality that we had to make a quite radical change. That was, I guess, part of the Scanlon principle of recognizing what day is it and what's our compelling need for change. And we realized we had to have a much more serious change. And that involved changes we had to make with our customers. In fact, right in the middle of a recession, we ended up adjusting some of our prices because we had to do that, and that's almost unheard of. We had to make major reductions in our workforce. That's always very, very difficult. And we had to decide a balance between what we're going to do in investing for the future with our technology and new products, and what we're going to do in terms of hunkering down, protecting us in the short term, and rebuilding profitability. Because it was a period that we lost money for 2 years in a row, and that was the first time that had ever happened since the company had been founded in 1905. And it was only one of a handful of times that the company had lost money since 1905. So it was a very dramatic period overall. So we were able to develop a comprehensive plan, shared it with all the employees, saying this is the reality of the situation we're facing. This is what we think it's going to take for us to come out of this strong and roaring, yet protect us while we're going through it and not knowing when it's going to turn around. And this is what we need to do overall, and this is how we believe would be a fair way, which is another part of the Scanlon Principles equity, of sharing in the pain as we go through and making adjustments so we protect both the short term and the long term, and doing what is in the best interest of the people and the best interest of the company. We then deployed that to the teams. Teams then had goals. They had an opportunity to influence their goal, and then they had the complete responsibility of how they implement the goal. And in some cases, teams had to, when they had to make reductions in workforce, teams would sit there and decide amongst themselves who it was best to have leave and who it was best to have stay and the reasons for that. And in some cases, instead of having, if one person left, maybe they decided it was in the best interest of the company as well as the best interest of people to have two people work half-time while we moved through this recession as compared to having a person leave. So it was just a very powerful time to see people work together to make tough decisions. And in one case, I remember one of the team members saying that who was equally qualified with another team member, and they said that, well, I'm single, I can take the downturn better, that you have a family, and I think I should leave. So, I mean, seeing things like that happen was just really, tremendous.
My notes say that you had made a comment to me about we never lost sight of technology and innovation even during this downturn. Would you comment on that?
Yes, because I think that played a major role in the success of the company for the next decade plus, because we came out of that recession in the 80s not weak and battered, but strong and roaring. The company was founded in 1905, and we crossed $100 million sales in 1987, and during the recession we were about $30 million. So we moved up to 1987 to the $100 million sales level, and 2 years later, I believe, we crossed $200 million. And 3 years later, we crossed $300 million. So we really roared through that, and I attribute that not only to the strength of the people and their energy, commitment, and creativity that helped drive that, but to the fact that when we were going through that very difficult recession, we made decisions to continue with some key developments that fueled our growth. And I'd like to point out also that in 1990 there was another recession that hit a lot of companies pretty hard, and we grew right through that. We had been growing at a rate of, I think in excess of 20% per year going into it, and while the downturn was, fairly severe, we continued to grow, even though it wasn't as fast as the rate we were growing before, but we continued to grow and add jobs and grow the business for the shareholders. That's another reason why how you deal in tough times using the Scanlon principles can help you go through future recessions in a much stronger way.
As we've been talking about these examples of how you went through tough times at the Donnelly Corporation, it came out very well. You've referenced the Scanlon principle of identity several times, and now I'm going to ask you to actually get into the principles in more detail. There is a quote, though, that you said that I think sums up this whole conversation to this point, and this is your quote, Dwane. You were talking about the teams at Donnelly utilizing the Scanlon principles and how you dealt with the recession and reductions in how they were handled, and really a lot of freedom was given to teams to make those decisions. You said the teams came up with answers that were constantly in the best interest of the company and the needs of the workforce.
Absolutely. And they were wonderful in how they had gone about doing that. And I believe that they did that because they understood the reality that we were facing, and they were also committed. They didn't want to come out of this weak and battered. They wanted to come out strong and growing, too, because they wanted to have a credible plan for winning, over the long term, because they were making an investment of their career, for the long term, not just for the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. So it was a great way when everyone was focused on both the short term and the long term and doing what's right.
Dwane, this is a little bit off of what our planned discussion guideline here, but I just be interested if you have a thought on this. You just said workers are at their company and they're there for the long term. Most people would like to say, I'm here with this company for the long term. I want this to succeed long term. And you hear so much in the business literature and the newspapers and radio reports today about the focus on short-term profit. There's more literature coming out now that says that's really harming I don't know what word I want to say, the fundamental fabric of business. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I agree that it's adversely affecting the fundamental fabric of the business. I think we are going through a fundamental change as we're trying to become more effective, as individual companies trying to become more effective in dealing with this flat world that we're dealing with, where the global competition is so heated. And it's going to become even more heated as time goes by. And a lot of companies are finding themselves more in a survival mode than a growth mode. Unless you're, fairly well steeped and have fairly strong views in the Scanlon principles, for example, it's going to be exceedingly difficult for those leaders to just take, some focus off of the survival side and realize that part of what's involved in surviving is building around the people that you have that are going to be the key powerful force for not only surviving, but for helping power the company once you get ahead of that curve. And you have to have a fundamental belief that people have a deep desire to achieve their full potential, to make a difference in work and life, and they want to be part of a winning team. And a winning team is not only surviving, but it's being able to be successful after you get past some of these key challenges associated with surviving. Is you get surprised. Maybe a lot of companies have gotten surprised by what has happened with some of the global competition, that they were doing real well, and then all of a sudden they found new competition that was coming from places they knew little about, and they found their prices starting to go down tremendously, dramatically impacts their margins. Then they have to struggle, and sometimes they almost panic in how to deal with it. But unless you're firmly grounded with these principles, it's going to be hard for you to do the things that are right that's going to not only help you survive, but to preserve and build the fabric for the future. Because remember, in my comment that I made about how we dealt with the recession in the 80s, while our survival wasn't at stake, we lost money 2 years in a row, and that's pretty serious. We used the Scanlon principles during that period to not only deal with that, but the way we dealt with it built the people and teams that helped them be stronger as we moved in out of that survival mode or getting out of the loss mode, profitable mode, and then dramatically build our profitability through the rest of the couple decades or so.
Dwane, many people that utilize the Scanlon business principles will say no two Scanlon plans are alike. To be effective, the practice and application of the Scanlon principles have to fit the unique circumstances of a company. I'd like for you to share your views on the Scanlon principles, and you write about your views in a book that you have that's coming out called The Leadership Roadmap. Part of what I'm asking you to share is how you view the Scanlon principles that you talk about in the Leadership Roadmap, and then after we go through the principles one by one, for our listeners, we'll name the principles: the identity principle, the participation principle, the equity principle, and the competence principle. That's the fundamental building blocks of the Scanlon principles in the Scanlon business process. You add some additional material to that in your book, The Leadership Roadmap, that you believe allows this material and these ideas to become a framework for building successful corporations for time on and on and on. But I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that. But for right now, let's start by having you go through your views on the Scanlon principles and how you see that they're valuable. And I know that there's some examples I'm going to ask you to share about each principle. So let's start. I'll just let you take it from there, Dwane.
Okay, I'd love to, Ron. And you hit the principles right on. They're characterized by the 4 words: identity, participation, equity, and competence. In our book, and as I have described them, we define them a little differently than what you typically see defined. But I'd like to start out with each one of them and talk just briefly about them, and then we can maybe get into some of the examples you would like to. On the identity principle, there's actually 4 components to the identity principle. They are purpose, reality, the right job, and the job right. Identity in general terms is those characteristics that differentiate an individual, differentiate a team, or differentiate an entire organization from all the other organizations or people and teams. We say there's 4 components to the identity principle. The first component is purpose, and purpose is intended to be mainly for the people of the company. It's something that you can share with everyone else, customers or shareholders or so, but it's more intended for the people of the company. And it should be a very short statement that provides guidance and provides inspiration. It should be stated in a statement that could be just a few words and no more than maybe a couple of lines and make it easy to understand. I'd like to share at least a metaphor that has come to mind as a result of my talking to other business leaders over the years at different meetings, and we'd touch on the subject of purpose. And I was always amazed or maybe taken aback that business leaders, most often when you said, well, what is the purpose of the business, they would say, well, it's to make money. It's to be profitable. They were not able to really articulate much beyond that. It's that single-minded focus. I thought, there's a lot more to it than that. So I'd like to use the metaphor of the body to just briefly talk about purpose. If we think of our bodies, or us as people, we need food and we need air and we need water, for us to survive. Without those, we don't have a chance to survive. But I think we would all agree that the purpose of our life goes way beyond just making sure we have enough food, air, and water to survive. Now, if we think of a business, if it's a for-profit business, the profits of the company are like the food, air, and water to a body. You have to have profits or you can't survive. But there has to be a purpose for the business that is beyond what the profits are. And that purpose is a purpose that should guide and inspire the people. It should help you to attract and retain and motivate, the quality of people that you want to have long term. The second element of identity.
Dwane, before you jump into the second element, would you share what the purpose of the Donnelly Corporation was for our listeners?
Yes. The purpose, as we described it, was to be the first choice. Now, what do we mean by the first choice? We believe that any organization brings together several stakeholder groups. Now, in our organization and most businesses, the stakeholder groups are the same. You bring together investors, you bring together customers, you bring together employees, you bring together suppliers, and you operate in a community that depends very much on you. We wanted to be the first choice with each of our major stakeholders. Otherwise, for an investor, if they were making an investment in an automotive type of company, they have to make that choice. We wanted us to become the first choice of investors that were wanting to invest in the automotive sector. Within our employees, we wanted the employees of the company to say, of all the different companies I could go to, and I have an opportunity, to seek employment, this is really my first choice. We wanted our customers, who always have the choice of going to a competitor to source the business and to buy the service or the product that we want, we wanted to be their first choice. And to suppliers that we depend on so critically in terms of the support they give us, along with the products and services and that, we wanted to be their first choice. And we also wanted to be viewed in the communities in which we operated as being the first choice. If they had to pick another company to come into the community, they would pick a company like ours, or they would pick us as their first choice. So that's what we meant by becoming the first choice.
You're listening to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series. I'm Ron Duffy, and we are talking with Dwane Baumgardner, retired chairman and CEO of Donnelly Corporation, a global supplier of mirrors, windows, door handles, and electronics to major automotive original equipment manufacturers throughout the world. In this interview, Dwane shares his views on the use of Scanlon plans to create high-performing and ethical organizations and the key ideas in the Leadership Roadmap, a book co-authored by Dwane which discusses how to develop the right people systems and the right business systems to achieve organizational success and sustain it for the long term. Well, thanks for that explanation of purpose. I'm going to ask you to move on and jump into the different aspect of the identity principle that you call reality. And this one, I think, is just so central to the success of any business. I'm glad you're talking about it now.
Yes, the reality principle, as you mentioned, or the reality component of the identity principle is really, really big. It deals with having everyone in the organization understand what day it is and why is there a compelling need for change. Most companies or businesses or organizations deal with this as part of their strategic plan by doing an environmental analysis, what we call an environmental analysis, an external analysis in terms of what are the trends and what are the outlook in the global market and the market, the local markets, the economic outlooks, competitive outlooks, technological trends, and all sorts of things like that. And usually those are described on a series of sheets of paper that either in bullet statements or short statements. And they also do what is typically referred to as a SWOT analysis. And SWOT is I think most people would recognize, as an acronym for a summary of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And those are typically stated as a series of bullet points on sheets. But then most companies move, our experience has been, most companies move from those results of that analysis into immediately what is their vision and what is their strategy and so on. They assume that people will reach a conclusion from reading the environmental analysis and the SWOT analysis, which typically takes some time because it's a number of sheets of paper. They'll assume that they'll arrive at a common agreement that there's a compelling need for change. It's been my experience in serving on several boards and watching several management teams at work, and in my own experience at Donnelly, that if you only are using those statements to try to arrive at an agreement for the compelling need for change, you start asking people, well, what do they think the compelling needs or change from this? And you'll get some conclusions that they'll write. But you ask a group then to do it individually and go around the table, and you'll find out that everyone is not quite on the same page. There's generally some overlap, but it's not sharp and clear and concise. We have come to believe that it's extremely powerful if leaders can summarize, say on one page, 3 to 5 short statements of reality that define the impact on the business that the environmental analysis and the SWOT analysis will have if certain things happen or don't happen, that are both good and bad. And these 3 to 5 short statements are ones that can be much more easily understood by the organization. This is assuming that you want to get your organization in total aligned around the compelling need for change and also supportive of ultimately the direction of change, that they represent a very powerful tool of getting everyone, starting at the board all the way through all the teams, on the same page. And why is there such a need to get a common view of a compelling need for change? Because if you don't have a common view of a compelling need for change, we believe very strongly it's going to dissipate a lot of energy within the organization in terms of what teams and groups should be doing to drive the future success of the company. They're not going to be aligned nearly as sharply as they could be. In this day of hyper-competition, being totally aligned in what you're trying to achieve is of critical importance.
Dwane, there's a couple of examples that we talked about that kind of show what it means to have a compelling need to change. One was about Donnelly was in a situation where they were going to acquire a mirror company in Germany. Can you relate that to how you told the workforce that there's a compelling need to change and why we're doing this?
Absolutely, because what we had to do is say, being a global player in the markets and the customers that we serve was critically important to the long-term well-being, which was both the survival and the continued success of the company. And without having a much larger presence, being a credible global player, that we would not be able to effectively survive and prosper long-term. That was essentially the short statement. That then led to the fact that we didn't have a significant enough presence in Europe, and this acquisition that we were looking at made a lot of sense on that basis. And it was important to get to that point because when you make an acquisition that's of major consequence, you have to effectively integrate that into the organization. And integrating into the organization takes a lot of time and energy of people within the organization to do that. And in the meantime, they're being stretched very hard to meet the demands that are placed upon them, to meet the market needs, within the North American market. Making sure that we were all together, that it was critically important to become a global player, was of absolute importance to getting strong understanding, support, and commitment for the need to do the acquisition.
Dwane, you shared another example with me about, as an example of a compelling need to change, that Donnelly was involved in starting a joint venture in China. Now, you had to build a compelling need to change about why you're doing this, because the employees at Donnelly had a lot of reasons why they were saying, why are you doing this? For example, it's taking time away from our base operations. There's financial investment in this. There's a lot of people and time involved. So it's putting pressure on everybody. These are reasons why the people in the company are saying, what's going on? Why, this isn't a good thing. So you might have disagreement, you might have dissension. So now I'd ask you to relate, how do you build a compelling need to change so everybody gets on board that you need a joint venture in China?
This was tied, very closely to the arguments that we were making for the compelling need for change that supported an acquisition in Europe, the need to become a strong global player. And one of the reasons that this was so hard for us was we were doing this, I think it was almost 15 years ago that we started. If we were doing this today, people would more readily understand it, because the dynamics that's happening in China are quite apparent to almost everyone now. But 15 years ago, it wasn't quite so apparent. We had done a number of joint ventures of different sorts over time, and joint ventures are very, very complicated and difficult to make successful. Talking about entering into another, in fact, it was two joint ventures we actually ended up into in China with regard to mirrors for a while. There was a lot of initial resistance to do that, because people knew within the organization that there was going to have to be some significant investment on their time transferring some of the technologies that we had to be helpful to the joint venture to be successful. And we had to again make the case that if we're not a global supplier, and this is an area in the market is going to grow dramatically over time, we need to be there early. We need to establish our capability well, or we're not going to be able to be successful and survive longer term. I'm very pleased to report that those joint ventures turned out to be wholly owned by the company. So they're 100% part of the company now. We are the leading mirror manufacturer in China, and we supply the local market there. It's not all shipped back to North America or to Europe. And we are prepared, though. Right now we can more effectively compete in North America and Europe from the local markets, but we're prepared if the operation in China becomes so good that it can compete there. We're prepared as a global company now to source the business wherever it's going to be in the best interest of the company, best interest of the customer, and effectively in the long term, because of that, in the best interest of the people.
Well, thanks, Dwane, and I'm hoping our listeners are picking up that the reason, and we're talking about the identity principle, and we're talking about the reality that a company faces, and it's leadership's responsibility to lay it out in plain English for the workforce, what you face, why you need to change so that you can stay competitive, keep everybody's job, be profitable, all those things. It isn't always cupcakes and roses, that people have different views. There's dissension, and unless you are able to articulate, as in your compelling need to change, this is why we're doing this, and you do that well, you have a chance for great success.
Absolutely.
In the interest of time, I've got to move you on to the right job and then job right. Yep. And there is a story I want you to tell, but please pick it up from the under the identity principle. There's these key concepts that you write about in the leadership roadmap. We've covered purpose and we've covered the reality, and now you're talking about right job and then job right.
Right, absolutely. On right job, we see there's 5 components to the right job. The first component is having a short statement of what business you want to be in, otherwise your business definition. The second short statement is your statement of vision. What do you want to become in this business? The third statement is your strategy, which is your approach for approaching the critical success factors that you believe are important for you to be able to realize your vision. The fourth is a short statement of objectives, strategic objectives that are measurable, that cover a 3 to 5 year period, that give you confidence that you're effectively applying your strategy to achieve your vision within your business definition. And the last statement is your annual objective, that are measurable, clearly measurable, that you need to achieve this year. Ultimately, you would end up with 5 sheets of paper, for any size of business, and each sheet would have not a whole lot of words on it. The business definition could be very short, a lot of white space, so easy for anyone to look at and read and understand. A lot of white space, just a few words. What do you want to become in this business? Your strategy could be maybe 2 or 3 bullet statements, maybe 4, maximum 5, with a lot of white space on a piece of paper. Your strategic objective, maybe 5 to 7 short statements of objective, what you need to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years, and your annual objective, again, 5 to 7 objectives on one page. So with only 5 pages, with a lot of white space on most of the pages, you can have a tool that is exceedingly valuable for an organization and define the right job. Now then, doing the job right, you can have an outstanding description of what the right job is that I just described. But if you don't execute that right job well, you're not going to succeed. You can have a brilliant strategy and a vision and wonderful statements of objectives, but if you execute poorly, you're going to lose, most likely. So doing the job right is all about deploying this right job definition to all of the teams throughout the company so that every team is in complete alignment with what the total organization is trying to achieve.
Dwane, thank you. You told me a brief story about part of the workforce at Donnelly that's called the housekeepers or / material handlers that relates to this. Can you share that example?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic example, and I was really excited when I heard it. We had a customer visit one of our plants, and this plant, I think, made modular windows. They happened to walk by one of the housekeepers, again, doing some material handling, but at one of the the real important but yet basic levels of the company, and they happened to ask that person, well, what are their objectives, and how does that fit in overall to the success of this plant and serving the customer? I'm happy to report that person was able to articulate by walking them over to a bulletin board, showing them what the objectives of their team were, and showing how they fit into the objectives of the total team, that the combined teams in that building, and then showing how that fit into the objectives of their business group. And it about floored, the customer. They couldn't believe that we had such an alignment of understanding, across that business unit of what they were trying to achieve, both personally and professionally with their own team, but how that fit in with everyone else. I'd like to say that every single plant was to that level, but we weren't to that level in all plants, but that they gave a good, vivid example of where we were trying to go, and the fact that we're in a state of becoming, and we were steadily moving in that direction with other plants.
So, Dwane, one of the common themes that's emerging as we listen to you share your experience at Donnelly is the identity principle that you've been talking about means that the level of understanding in the workforce about your business, why you do what you do in your particular area, and how it relates to the overall objective of the company and the purpose of we want to be the first choice, is really, people have it at a deep level. I know you've mentioned to me in other parts of our preparation for this interview is that that's really a business asset.
Absolutely. And I'd like to really point out everything that I just described can be summarized on 7 sheets of paper with lots of white space on each paper. And I think we would all agree with lots of white space with a few words on 7 sheets of paper is something that you have an outstanding chance of everyone in the organization understanding.
All right. Thank you, Dwane. Before I move you on to the participation principle and the equity principle and the competence principle, there was one other story that I think you can tell briefly. It was about the head of a European car manufacturer that came to one of your plants.
Yeah, this was the head of purchasing of a prestigious a European manufacturer of prestigious cars. Their company was a customer of ours, and we were working to get more business and always wanting to maintain great relationships with them. So they were visiting our plants. After touring the production operations, they came to the conference room. We started to talk, and he happened to make a comment. He said, "Hey, you can send the word out to the people in the plant that they can slow down now, that we finished our tour." And the reason he said that, he was so impressed with the pace at which people were working that he thought that this was just all part of a show. Once the tour was done, they could slow down. And we said, "Hey, this is the way they work all the time. There's nothing that was different today. And what you come back tomorrow, you could come back at any time you wish, unannounced, and you're going to see the same level." And it was almost impossible for him to believe that because of the pace and what he was used to seeing. And I attribute that directly to the fact that we had a highly business literate workforce, who understood what we're trying to achieve with our purpose. They understood what day it was. They were doing the right job, and they were certainly doing the job right.
Thank you, Dwane.
Okay, the next principle I'd like to talk about is participation. The real purpose of participation is not a feel-good type of process where you get everyone together and they feel good talking together as a team and that. A lot of leaders think of that. The hard-hitting business purpose of participation is to develop synergy and commitment. You really want 1 + 1 to be much greater than 2. The output of each individual worker summed with everyone else to be much greater than the individual sums. Everyone nowadays thinks they have participation, but it's easy to claim, but it's very hard to do. And only leaders, I want to point out, can provide the opportunity to participate, and only team members can accept the responsibility. There's 2 dimensions to make it real. Leadership has to do a great job with the identity principle, and they have to establish a climate of openness to build trust, and they also have to make sure that team skills are built so that people understand how to, because participation involves meetings, they have to understand how to run effective meetings and to participate in meetings. So those are some of the dimensions that are really critical to participation.
So there's some training involved in learning how to participate effectively.
You have to know how to plan for a meeting, you have to know how to conduct a meeting, and you have to know how to participate in a meeting.
The whole point of it all is synergy. It's
synergy and commitment, because if people are participating, they're going to be much more committed to what you're trying to achieve if they have an opportunity and they are exercising that, and then that enhances your chances of getting synergy. And I'd like to point out, synergy is a key part of developing a competitive advantage and winning longer term.
We'll get to those topics in a short order here.
Now, I'd like to also then briefly talk about competence, and I have to really keep my comments brief here, because most books that are written on leadership, there's whole books that are written on these various elements. But what we really wanted to do is focus on the really key elements that we thought made a difference between being a winner and being successful and not. And there's 3 dimensions that we identify for competence in the Scanlon context: personal competence, professional competence, and organizational competence. Personal competence, there's roughly 4 major skills there, or characteristics. Integrity, and integrity is more than just telling the truth and having good moral values. It's about walking the talk. It's about being authentic. The second dimension is passion. The third dimension is strength. You have to have mental, emotional, and physical strength. How you deal with stress and how you deal with your own ego development. And you have to have great interpersonal interaction skills. Professional competence is all about leading change, managing complexity, building a learning organization, building a learning team, learning yourself, building your technical skills, communications, and being able to be an effective coach. And organizational competence we define as really understanding the Scanlon principles and lean enterprise and innovation principles that we're going to talk about later on.
You're listening to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series. I'm Ron Duffy, and we are talking with Dwane Baumgardner, retired chairman and CEO of Donnelly Corporation, a global supplier of mirrors, windows, door handles, and electronics to major automotive original equipment manufacturers throughout the world. In this interview, Dwane shares his views on the use of Scanlon plans to create high-performing and ethical organizations and the key ideas in the Leadership Roadmap, a book co-authored by Dwane which discusses how to develop the right people systems and the right business systems to achieve organizational success and sustain it for the long term. So now we're going to move on to the equity principle. And as part of your discussion of the equity principle, Dwane, you've mentioned to me that one of your the most powerful experience with the Scanlon principles and business plans centered around your work on the Donnelly Committee. The work of the Donnelly Committee is very much tied up with the equity principle, and I'd like you to share that story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to set the stage on the equity principle in the following way, though. There's two dimensions to the equity principle. The first dimension is making sure that you have a fair and balanced return for all of your stakeholders that we described. The second dimension, which gets into the Donnelly Committee, is resolving internal issues of fairness. We believe that any time you have more than one person in the company, you have 2, 100, 1,000, the more people you have, you're always going to have issues of internal fairness. And if you're not able to resolve those issues effectively and efficiently, they dissipate energy that you could be using to build your competitive advantage and winning. I'd like to use the metaphor of an engine, car engine. If the oil is running low in an engine, you're going to build up more heat in the engine, and that's going to take away from the power that you can deliver to the rear wheels to power the vehicle to where you want to go. Same thing with an organization. If people are upset about how some internal issues are being handled and feel it's unfair, it takes away the power of the organization to be more effective competitor. So at Donnelly, to deal with this, we had two separate and distinct structures. One structure was the work structure, which was responsible for doing the work of the company, building the products or providing the services that we did for the customers. And we were organized in a way that was very similar to many companies. We had a functional organization at one time, and we had a divisional type of organization another time. We had engineering groups, and we had accounting groups, and so on. And we staffed those groups based on competence people had in the particular area. So if you wanted a salesman, you wanted to make sure you had someone with great experience and knowledge in sales. Same thing with accounting or human resources and so on, that they had great skills and experience in their areas. Now, the other structure was the equity structure. And there was a strong belief there that when it came to an issue of internal fairness, that everyone had equal competence. So we staffed our equity structure based on a representative structure. People would elect who they felt could best represent them in dealing with issues of internal fairness. The Donnelly Committee was, well, first of all, we had committees at the plant level, and we had committees at a business group level, and we had committees at the total company level. The Donnelly Committee was at the total company level, and that was the one I served on. It was sort of like the Supreme Court on equity issues. Hopefully most of the issues got resolved close to the where the issue was, but sometimes an issue had implications across the entire company, and that's what the Donnelly Committee was all about. All the votes at the Donnelly Committee were by unanimous agreement, and that was a very powerful tool because once the decision was made, everyone in the company knew that everyone on the Donnelly Committee supported that agreement. So there was no divisive majority rules type of process in place. And that put a lot of pressure on everyone to focus on what's the issue and what's the right thing to do. One of the most complex issues that they faced every year was what the annual wage package should be. Now, just imagine that. You're dealing with people's pay and what the increase should be for the year. And most companies have tremendous amount of friction when they go about dealing with those, and sometimes a very strong lack of commitment or disagreement with what the final outcome is, and it may take a long time, and sometimes they even have work stoppages in that, which affects the customer and affects the company longer term. But on the wage package decision, our Donnelly Committee had to consider several major factors. what's happening in the competitive job market we have, and where we go out and try to find new employees when we need them. How well are we doing compared to competition? What's the situation in the markets we serve? What's happening with our customers? What's happening with our company? How well did we do this year? What are we projected to do next year? And what is the financial condition of the company overall? And then what's the morale of the people in the company that needs to be taken into consideration? So they would collect information on all of those areas, blend it into a pot, and then come up with a decision that was in the best interest of the company overall. That process took typically, I think on average, 2 to maybe 2.5 calendar months, with a meeting maybe every, one meeting per week, maybe every 10 days. Within that period, they were always able to come up with a decision that ended up there was a high level of understanding, support, and commitment. And not only was that one of the great outcomes of the process, but in the process of doing that, they were sharing all this information with the rest of the people in the company, and that helped us build a very highly business literate workforce. That was tremendously important to the success of the company, because if you have a highly business literate workforce where more people throughout the company understand where things are at and that, it basically allows them more time to really focus on the issues that's going to help us become more competitive and not get into a lot of arguments or disagreements internally over the coffee pot or the water cooler or within team meetings of well, they think this is unfair or this is not right or so on. We have much more alignment. So it was a very, very powerful asset, and it was a very, very wonderful experience to go through, because you could see people from all parts of the company, from the production area of the company, because we were a manufacturing company, from the office area, from the team leadership area, and then from the executive area, all working together, trying to find an answer that was in the best interest of everyone.
Well, thanks for sharing that story about the Donnelly Committee and its relationship to the equity principle. The power that's in that story about effectiveness in an organization and high performance. As I listen to you talk about it, I'll ask you if you concur with this. To me, every principle we've been talking about, the identity principle, is involved in that story. To do the kind of work you were talking about with the wage package decisions, you have to understand the business to come up with a good decision. So identity principles involved there, the participation principles involved there, trusting teams to go to their various divisions and explain the situation and the information is very much participation. Having a unanimous vote, that's walking the talk, I think, where I'm guessing now, maybe in some companies they'll say, well, yeah, we want participation, but then it comes down to some vote and it's divisive. You're kind of putting a sour taste on participation, but by requiring a unanimous vote, it's everybody, look, we're in this together until we find something we all agree on. That just supports the true meaning of participation and, kind of puts a positive pressure on it. And through this whole process, you're building up competence. Would you concur with what I'm saying?
No, you're hitting the nail right on the head and not connecting the dots perfectly. I feel really good that sounds like how I've described things have come across, clearly, because you've articulated it, I think, better than I could. So that's great.
Just before we leave the equity principle and jump into a little more of the key concepts in your book, The Leadership Roadmap, we talked a lot about the fairness aspect of equity. I wanted you to say again the other aspect of equity, fair share of the resources and profits. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Well, in fact, this gets into another dimension of Scanlon, because Scanlon first became known as more of a productivity gain-sharing program. People typically, when they would come to our company and want to know what kind of Scanlon process did we have, for a long time, they really were just asking, what kind of bonus formula did we have for sharing in the success of improvements that were made? And we kept having to say, hey, there's a whole lot more involved to this. This is a philosophy for how you run the business. It's fundamental beliefs associated with it. The productivity gain-sharing program is just one part of it. It's an important part, but it's just one part of it. Where it fits in is exactly in the equity principle. So there's 4 principles. How you share in the financial success of the company with everyone in the company, including the shareholders, is part of your fundamental equity principle. To make sure there's a fair and balanced return in the success of the company among all the stakeholders. And hopefully it's a fair and balanced high return, which is what our goal was for all of our stakeholders.
In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to talk now about the book that you have written with a co-author, and your co-author's name is?
Russ Scaffede.
Okay. So you and Russ wrote the book titled The Leadership Roadmap. Why did you write The Leadership Roadmap?
Well, we've always strongly believed in the Scanlon principles as being extremely powerful, but we were always puzzled why more companies didn't commit to institutionalizing these principles to become excellent practitioners, with the goal of achieving sustained high level of performance. And after reflecting on that, I concluded that there were 2 reasons, for this situation, which drove us to write the Leadership Roadmap. The first reason is we felt that the Scanlon principles by themselves did not provide a clear enough picture of how they help organizations improve profitability and grow the business. You can go through all of those and say, okay, if you do all of those, things are going to be better in that, but it's not as direct as it needs to be. Everyone tends to agree, I think, with the value of the principles and that they're asking you and they're showing you how to do some good things, but we wanted to provide a solid link that even the most skeptical, hard-nosed, number-oriented business leader could relate to. And so we wanted to link the Scanlon principles to what was involved in mastering business success. So that's the first reason. The second reason, given the literally almost thousands of books on leadership and organization development, we could not find a good book that we felt really described in more detail what you needed to do, to build a leading organization that was clear, concise, coherent, and comprehensive. I mean, all of the things we're being taught were great, but any one book by itself wasn't comprehensive. So what we wanted to do was to provide a how-to-do-it type of cookbook that not only provided some good theory and a framework, but also what needs to be done at each level of leadership, starting at the board of directors, the CEO and the senior leadership, and relating this to all teams and all levels within an organization.
Could you share with us the core beliefs that are associated with this book that you've written, The Leadership Roadmap?
Yes, I very much look forward to doing that. I'd like to put them in the following categories, and I'll describe each category as we go through. The first one talks about winning, and this is trying to get the direct link to, even the most skeptical, hard-nosed business leader of what it takes to win in that. We believe very strongly that all the stakeholders of any organization want to be part of a winning team. We believe that winning consistently requires mastering success with a strong competitive advantage and the will to use this competitive advantage effectively. We believe that the strongest source of competitive advantage is consistently providing the best value to your customers. We're all customers, and we want to have the best value. When we go out and buy anything every day, we go to the grocery store or we buy gasoline or we buy TVs or houses or cars, we want to get the best value. We define value as equal to a simple fraction. The numerator of the fraction, the top part of it, is the performance of the product or the service that you're buying. You want high performance. You want also quality and delivery of that product and that service. And you want then the last component is your total experience to be really good. So the 3 parts, performance of the product and service, the quality and delivery of that, and the total experience. And so you want that numerator fraction to be very large. The denominator fraction, or the lower part, is the price you pay for that product or service, and then all the other indirect costs you incur in making that product and service part of whatever you want to do. Now, you want that to be as small as possible. So we know from our early mathematics, to make a fraction large, we need to make the numerator, the top part, very large. We want to make the denominator very small. We believe that when you're able to get the value of that fraction in your customer's mind to be higher than the value that they perceive they receive from any of your competitors, that you are providing best value. We believe that the only way that you'll know if you're providing best value is the amount of business that your customers award to you and the terms and conditions under which they award that to you. Now, we believe that there are only three processes that really matter in building best value. We believe that to make that numerator large and the denominator small, it's innovation and lean enterprise are the two fundamental processes for maximizing that value. How they do that is as follows. Innovation, there's two dimensions to innovation. Your quantum advances in your product, where you come out with something that really surprises and delights your customers, or there can be incremental improvements in your product and your service, or in your quality and your delivery.
Before you move on, can you briefly give an example from Donnelly of a quantum change?
I'd love to do that quickly because that helped power our growth dramatically through the 80s. It was a wonderful story. A modular window, we define that as it goes into a vehicle. It's the fixed window in many vehicles and in many SUVs and in many two-door sedans and even four-door sedans have small fixed windows. So the car companies used to assemble those in the vehicle with a number of components. They had a bezel that was decorative. They had a ceiling type of gasket. They had different attachment studs and so on. And they had pieces they had to integrate for the interior trim part. They assembled all those on the assembly line years ago, 20 years ago or so. That was a very laborious process, and the quality was always not so good, and they were limited what they could do from a styling viewpoint. Our teams came up with an approach to putting all of those components into a mold and molding a window that was a single unit assembly, so that when it got to the assembly line, all they had to do was essentially almost snap it into the vehicle and to make a couple of quick attachments, and they were done. That gave them much more design freedom. They could come up with more innovative and stylish-looking products. It gave them much more quality because it looked better, it lasted longer, and it performed better. And it saved them money because the cost of integrating and all those parts on the assembly line and the quality rejects they would have was costly. We innovated that. There wasn't a product like that on the market. We caught people by surprise. We were able, because we were first to market, we were able to be the dominant supplier for many, many, many years, and it greatly powered the growth of the company. So that's, I think, the best example I can think of quantum innovation.
Now, Dwane, I know where I want to keep you going here, but this just came to me. I mean, did somebody just have an aha moment and that new innovation happened, or was it the result of many people in your investment in R&D over the years that allowed that to happen?
Well, that's another beautiful dimension of the story. Well, we was molding around glass to make our interior mirrors at the time. We were doing some small assembly of windows ourselves for the car companies, pre-assembly, in our plants. And one of our production employees made a comment to one of our engineers and said, well, we mold around mirrors, why don't we just mold around the windows? And that was an aha moment for the engineer, saying, wow, we could do that. So that was the genesis of it. But ultimately it took, a tremendous number of people, some very innovative engineers, entrepreneurial leadership, excellent sales and manufacturing to make it happen to the level that we made it happen.
And you had a culture that encouraged that kind of innovation at Donnelly.
People were free. They felt comfortable doing that. It worked very wonderfully.
Okay, Dwane, I thank you for letting me interrupt you to have you tell that story. Now, I'd ask you to get back on track as you were going through the steps and the key concepts.
Lean enterprise, there's two dimensions of lean enterprise. There's process dimension of taking out waste of the process. A lean enterprise is an enterprise that's able to do the right job right the first time, every time without waste. It's about identifying waste, eliminating waste, and changing the system that's causing waste. And typically you focus on the process that you use for provide your product or your service, and that involves the type of equipment or the type of approach or your structure on how you provide a service if you're a bank or a grocery store, or if you're a manufacturing organization, type of equipment. But it also involves product improvements, incremental in nature, which is much like you see in the innovation process. Lean enterprise helps really minimize the denominator, and they help make incremental improvements to the numerator. Innovation helps make major improvements in the numerator, and they can help make some significant improvements in the denominator.
We could talk for an hour about lean enterprise.
Yes,
the
right.
steps, how you do it, different stages, the process. The point you're making is this is such a fundamentally key process to the success of any business, and you go into this in detail in your book, The Leadership Roadmap.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But then we ask ourselves, well, who drives innovation and lean enterprise? Well, it's the people. People are the drivers of these two critical processes in the organization. They do all the work of the company. They have all the ideas, ultimately the ones that implement all the ideas in that. So that's why we've come to the conclusion that people, innovation, and lean enterprise are the only three processes that matter in any organization, because they're the prime determinants of your competitive advantage and your best value, and which are fundamental to building a winning organization. And how it ties into Scanlon. Basically, the Scanlon principles are the key element of engaging the people in the organization to tap their total energy, their creativity, and their commitment. If you go through those four principles, and if you practice those four principles, you're going to have a highly engaged workforce, you're going to have a highly skilled workforce, you're going to have one that's willing to commit their total creativity and their energy, to being successful. That's a very, very powerful combination in our books.
Thank you, Dwane, for running through the key concepts in the Leadership Roadmap. When do you expect the Leadership Roadmap to be published, and how can people get a copy of it?
We expect it to be published within the next 4 months. We've been working on it for some time. Our publisher is North River Press, and that people could best get a copy by contacting the Scanlon Leadership Network. That's going to be one of the distribution sources, and they can contact them through www.scanlonleader.org.
Dwane, as you're the president of the Scanlon Foundation, and I'd like to ask you to share your views on how you expect to help change the situation where the Scanlon principles are not very widely known, and change that so they are widely known, and so that more people can enjoy the benefits of the Scanlon principles and the key business processes that you're talking about.
Well, we're just getting the foundation started, and we're in the walk before we run, or crawl before we walk, before we run. So we're certainly in the crawl stage right now. But our first goal is to expand the awareness and the knowledge of Scanlon through published materials. And I'm very pleased to report that an important Scanlon anthology has been pulled together by Larry Spears and Paul Davis. Larry Spears is the former CEO of the Robert Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, and he's a director emeritus now. And he's published many books on servant leadership and been the editor. And Paul Davis is the president of the Scanlon Leadership Network. They have collaborated and pulled together the works of many key contributors over the past 30, 40 years in Scanlon. And they pulled together an excellent book that we expect to be published in the coming 6 months. And that's going to hopefully lift the understanding, at least make available a better understanding of what Scanlon is all about to a larger group, with a book that will be very interesting to read, I believe. We also want to support educational efforts, both the graduate and undergraduate level, through an interim program. And we want to, consistent with supporting it at the graduate level, we want to advance the understanding of Scanlon and advance some of the concepts of Scanlon through some research that might be done from time to time.
Dwane, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the Scanlon Leadership Network. In your view, what makes the network valuable? How can people learn more about the network?
The network has been a key part to our success, as I described earlier, and what makes it valuable is the companies, the quality of the companies that are a member of the network, and the progress that they're making in implementing the Scanlon process within their organization. One of the things that I described earlier is the companies tend to use a little different approaches, and so it's a way of learning best practices from the different approaches that they've used. And a lot of times as you're going through it and trying to do it yourself, it's really good to be able to have a group that you can send, or you can talk to the CEO, or send any one of your functional groups or people over to another company, see what they're doing, share experiences, and to help advance your thinking and help advance your practices. So it's through that networking, what it's all about. They also provide an excellent conference, an annual conference every year, where they always pick a wonderful topic. This coming year, it's going to be on innovation. They've had one in the past on lean enterprise. They've always gotten high ratings from the conference. So the annual conference, monthly newsletters, and the opportunity to network with other companies are really the key contribution that the network makes, I think, for helping companies be successful.
Well, thank you, Dwane. You had mentioned to me that there had been some research done. I think you mentioned the Gallup poll, and I don't know who else did this research.
Oh, yeah.
The research said that about the number I have is 70% of the workers in America, or maybe it was beyond America, but 70% of the workers are not really engaged in their work. And your comment to me was, what a tremendous resource to tap if you could make an improvement on that. I think I know you'd say that leaders that try to utilize the Scanlon principles and use the business processes that you say are so critical, the innovation and lean enterprise, along with the Scanlon principles to have your people systems work well, is a key way to tap that resource. And what an opportunity.
Yes, and that applies, their research expands across almost all the developed countries in the world. So it shows that it's not only this is what's characteristic in North America. They vary a few percentage points in different parts of the world. And out of that 70% that go to work not engaged, roughly half of that group is actively disengaged. There's a huge opportunity there. And as leaders and companies, are struggling with what it takes to be successful, we would hope that they would look at how can they better tap the power of the people within their organization to help them do that. And we think that the Scanlon principles, if you have people that are operating with purpose that guides and inspires, if they understand what day it is, if they're given a credible vision for winning, if they know and understand the objectives of the organization and what their objectives are, if they're given the opportunity to participate and they're treated fairly and they're provided an opportunity to grow and develop, you have an exceedingly powerful influence. And I'll guarantee anyone that embarks on the journey that they'll be very pleased with the results if they stick with it.
You've been listening to one of the Scanlon Leadership Network interview series. I'd like to thank our guest, Dwane Baumgardner, for being with us. This interview series about leadership and Scanlon business principles is brought to you by the Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation, a nonprofit association of high-performance, values-led organizations. Scanlon, where the best ideas come together. For information on the services offered by the Scanlon Leadership Network, visit their website at www.scanlonleader.org. That's on the web at scanlonleader.org. Scanlon is spelled S-C-A-N-L-O-N. Or call 517-332-8927. That's 517-332-8927. That's our interview for today. The great Scanlon leader, D.J. Dupree, taught us that every meeting with another human being should be what he called a fortuitous encounter. We are all children of God. We all have competencies and talents. The fact that we came together should make a difference. Here's wishing that all your encounters are indeed fortuitous. I'm Ron Duffy, and on behalf of the Scanlon Leadership Network, thanks for listening.